Okay, I hope to wrap up World War II against Germany in this video. Let's see if I can pull it off. So, I just got done talking about the Battle of the Bulge. A couple of things you know. The Battle of the Bulge continues into the new year, into 1945. Okay. It is the largest battle ever fought by the United States Army as far as number of troops involved, and it's almost entirely an American show. The British have very, very little involvement in this. It's pretty much an American versus German thing. So let's see if we can't, like I said, kind of wrap this whole thing up here. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we've seen this slide earlier because I talked about the election of 1944 already, but then I said I was going to pass on the Yalta Conference for the moment because it actually comes after the Battle of the Bulge, so the original PowerPoint is out of sync, and I'm not sure why they did it that way. But one of these days I'll fix it when I redo everything from scratch someday. All right, so let's talk about the Yalta Conference. Okay, so we talked about the Tehran Conference, which was back in November, December of 1943. Okay, 1945, the big three get together again. Okay, look at this picture. Look at Roosevelt. Do you think he's starting to look a little bit ragged out, a little bit worn down? I mean, think about it. He's had polio. He has no use of his legs for all practical purposes. He's had to deal with a Great Depression. And now he's had to lead his country through this horrific war. Do you think it might be bogging him down or bearing down on him and beating him up? Yeah. Still got a cigarette going here, though. Okay. So look at the difference in his look. At Yalta, which is in February 4th through 11th, 1945. Okay. By this point, the Battle of the Bulge is pretty much winding down. It looks like Hitler's, taking his last desperate action. Okay. Now, so, at this point, we pretty much know who's going to win the war in Europe. So what they're going to do at Yalta is talk about what do we do next? How do we envision the post-war world? What are we going to do about Japan? Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay, so one of the things Roosevelt and Churchill, but really Roosevelt, would like to get the Soviet Union to enter war against Japan. Now, the Soviet Union and Japan had not been at war all this time. Stalin was only having to deal with the Germans. That doesn't mean that the Japanese and the Russians had a really warm, fuzzy relationship. Remember, Russia and Japan had fought a war back in 1905-ish, and there had been border skirmishes between the Soviet armies and the Japanese in the days, sometime before Pearl Harbor. Because remember, let me get my pen here. Here's China. Pen. I said pen. Where's my pen? Alright. Here's China. Remember the Japanese. Here's Japan. Remember the Japanese are working in China where Russia's right here. Russia is basically the lead country of the Soviet Union. There had been border clashes here on the border somewhere. Don't exactly ask me where there had actually been battles between the Japanese and the Soviets, but there was never actually a war. Okay, so the relationships aren't real good. Okay? Roosevelt would really like the Soviets, upon the defeat of Hitler, to enter the war against Japan. Okay, and help finish off the Japanese. Okay. They're close to Japan. Now, the Soviets aren't going to want to do anything, okay, without something in it for them. And so, one question is, well, what about these islands right here? Like this island right here. Is that part of the Japanese islands? Or is it part of Russia? Okay, so this is a disputed area. Stalin's going to want, something for his trouble if he enters the war against Japan. Okay. There's some other things. Okay, Roosevelt would like to start a group called the United Nations. It's like a League of Nations reboot, only this time the United States would be involved, and he wants the Soviets to participate as well. Okay? So Roosevelt has images of this United Nations, and he would like Stalin to agree to join. Okay? So we're asking a lot of the Soviets. We want them to enter war against Japan. We want them to enter the United Nations. Okay. Now, some other things we're working at here at Yalta is what do you do about Germany? Okay. Okay. Don't worry about this right here. Don't worry about that. And then here's a map that really comes from a later period, so the guy must have just found the best thing he could. But it'll work for our purposes. Although, so we kind of just ignore all the labeling on here. Okay, and let's just look at the colors. Okay, so the Soviets are coming in from this direction, and the Americans and British are coming in from this direction. Okay, it seems pretty obvious that the Soviets will get to Berlin first. It's closer to them. Okay, so one of the things they have to establish is, we're going to have to occupy Germany after the war to make sure all the Nazis are out. Okay, so at Yalta they'll pick occupation zones. Okay, who will have what? Okay, and it looks like the Soviets will get to Berlin first. So they actually pick like a river. You don't want Soviet troops running into American troops and engaging in combat, thinking each other we're in different uniforms. And so all this is kind of being plotted out at Yalta. Okay, there's some other things too. The Soviets are supposed to help set up new governments in the countries that they've liberated from the Germans as they've come in from the east into places like Czechoslovakia, okay, or Poland. I mean, you got to reestablish governments there, right? So we'd like them to have free elections and that kind of stuff. More of that in a minute. Basically, though, at Yalta, this is where the sellout theory comes. That Roosevelt wanted Soviet participation in the war against Japan and in the United Nations, and that in return he gave up some to the Soviets. We kind of acknowledge that the Soviets should have a sphere of influence in Europe. The Soviets very much want a buffer between Russia and Germany. They've had bad experiences with their German neighbors. And so the Soviets, think they should have a sphere of influence where they kind of, run things. And Roosevelt's kind of okay with that. He kind of agrees to that. This is where the sellout theory comes from. Critics of Roosevelt say later, look, he was sick, he was old, he was tired, he wanted the Soviets to participate in his pipe dream of United Nations, and that he gave up too much to the Soviets at Yalta. Okay? Now, some of that comes later through the lens of looking back at the Cold War. Okay? So maybe it's unfair to Roosevelt to make these charges. Okay? And maybe they are. But hindsight's always 20/20, right? Okay? So all this is agreed to at Yalta. Stalin does say he will enter the war against Japan 90 days after the defeat of Germany. Okay? Takes time. It's a big country. You defeat the Germans, you can then move a lot of your troops and equipment from Germany back over to the side of the world closer to Japan. So Stalin says, I need 3 months to get everything in order and move the troops and that kind of stuff. But he agrees to enter war against the Japanese. Alright, so let's go to the next slide here. Alright, whoops, let me erase all this crap. Alright. It's a map of Europe, don't worry about it. Alright. Except, let's see, there's I guess that blob must be Poland. But like I said, we'll get back to this kind of stuff later. Alright, so I left you with Yalta. Completing the defeat of Germany. Here's the Battle of the Bulge again. I've already covered the Battle of the Bulge, so we're out of sync here because of the way the PowerPoint was originally set up. So something on my things to fix list. So let's fast forward. Here's the map again. You've already seen this. I've already talked about that. Here, U.S. Third Army under George Patton. He's on the end of course review sheet, but you don't have to worry about that now. But this is where Patton becomes one of the things he's famous for is relieving Bastogne, okay, during the Battle of the Bulge. Pictures from the Battle of the Bulge. Okay. But we want to get to the end of the war here. So problems with the Soviet Union. I'm going to skip over a lot of this. Don't worry about Romania and Prague. That's in Czechoslovakia. In Poland, the Soviets are heading into Poland. They stopped short of Warsaw because the Poles in the city of Warsaw rise up in revolt against the Germans, thinking the Soviets are almost there. Okay. The Soviets stop, apparently to let the Germans finish off the Poles, because if the Poles liberate the city themselves, then they're going to want to have some say in what happens next. So people accuse Stalin of stopping short of Warsaw to let the Germans take care of the opposition. Okay, that's an accusation. Could be some truth to that. Berlin, we've already kind of established, will be in the Soviet sphere of occupation. Okay? The Soviets are closer. They'll get to it first. In retrospect, a lot of people think, well, maybe we should have gone for it. But Eisenhower is in no hurry. He's no desire to take a bunch of casualties trying to capture Berlin if the politicians have already decided to give it to the Soviets. So that was a political decision. Okay? So we won't worry about that. What I want to get to is in April, everything changes. Maybe Franklin Roosevelt, he's only like 4 months into his fourth term, dies. He had a cerebral hemorrhage, if I recall, or a stroke. It was, he's had high blood pressure for years, and he's out. Okay, Hitler, who's surrounded in Berlin by the Soviet army, thinks, yes, this changes everything. This is how delusional he's gotten. The war's not going to stop because Franklin Roosevelt has died. Okay, the only thing Hitler can get out of it is knowing he outlasted Roosevelt. Okay. In May, with the Soviets, about to capture, the last little remnants of Berlin, Hitler marries his longtime mistress Eva Braun in a quiet ceremony. They then commit suicide because he doesn't want to be captured alive by the Soviets. This officially makes Adolf Hitler the worst honeymoon planner in history. The remaining German government, what's left of it, quickly goes to surrender to the Allies to stop the killing, the dying. Okay. Perry S. Truman's the new president. We'll get to him later. Here's where the Soviets and the American troops are meeting in Germany. They're happy to see each other for a little while. Here we go. Germans go to Eisenhower's office and surrender on May 7th. This becomes known as VE Day, Victory in Europe. It's the European Theater of Operations. Okay. I think the Soviets celebrated on the 8th, if I recall, because there was never ceremony in Berlin. The Soviets wanted a more formal ceremony. But anyway, the war is over with the Germans. The Germans have surrendered. Hitler is dead, and everybody's pretty darn happy about it. Okay. Ticker tape parades, and people reading newspapers. I love this headline here. Germany surrenders, it says. Well, I was trying to outline it. Didn't work. Probably in England, I'm thinking, since they're playing bagpipes. Let me see that last photos here. Okay, so the last slide ended abruptly. I've tried recording it twice, and when I would try to advance to the next slide, it would crash. So I don't know what the problem is. So I just tacked this slide onto the end so I could officially end it and not confuse you, where it just kind of went earlier. So anyway, VE Day said the Germans surrender on May 7th in Eisenhower's headquarters. Later, there's a formal surrender on May 8th, and I think that's actually the day now that everybody remembers is VE Day. Okay, so victory in Europe. Germany is defeated. It's all over, right? Oh no, wait! Gosh darn, there's still that War of Japan. So we still got a couple of lecture videos left to go. But we're done with Germany for now.